Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Assemblyman Kieran Lawler. I'm from Fishkill. I represent Dutchess County. We're here to call for an end to Speaker Silver's war on women. It's been a hostile work environment here in the Assembly for a number of women staffers over the years. I think that the J-Cope report and the Staten Island District Attorney's report made that clear, but they only looked at a narrow portion of what has gone on here. So we're calling for three things today. Number one, we're asking for the Albany County District Attorney to look into any possible crimes that have occurred here vis-a-vis harassment and assault on women, and also with regards to the payout, the secret payout of $103,000 that was made as part of this deal last summer. And we're also asking on the U.S. Attorney to make sure that the payment wasn't made through a conspiracy of fraud. The labeling of the payment of $103,000 was labeled very innocuously as lawyer-attorney. We believe that was to cover up what it was, a payout to keep the victims of sexual harassment silent. We're also calling on Speaker Silver to reimburse the taxpayers of New York State the $103,000 that was at the center of this payoff to keep victims silent. Why should the taxpayers pay for that? They didn't do anything wrong. And we're calling on our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, to either elect a new speaker or explain to the people of New York, both in their districts and around the state, why he should stay. With that, I'd like to introduce some of my colleagues. Assemblywoman Tenney.
Thank you. I'd just like to join in with Assemblyman Lawler and my colleagues. Last year, when this came to light back in August, I was actually the first person in the legislature to call for Silver's resignation as Speaker, and I still call for it today. I renew that. This type of behavior is not acceptable. He is the leader of our House, regardless of which party he's in. He needs to set the example and the tone. And obviously, we know the tone in Albany is pretty rough at this point. It's hard to look either way and know that somebody's not being taken out for some other kind of corruption. And this is exactly what we don't want in Albany. I wish the governor would join with us. As the governor claims, New York is open for business. He's spent a fortune on ads around the country trying to promote New York. And one thing we don't want to continue to promote is that we have a hostile work environment for the people that work in the State Assembly. And I support the efforts of my colleagues, and I think we've done enough talking now. It's time to act, and it's time for the U.S. Attorney, the Attorney General, everybody to get in on this and clean up Albany for once. And I hope the governor and the other leaders will join in with us. And I really implore and plead with my Assembly Democratic colleagues, especially the women on the other side of the aisle, to join with us in this effort. And thank you.
Well, I'm Assemblyman Steve McLaughlin, and my colleagues did a great job of summarizing what this is all about. I would just say that if this was the first time this has happened, it'd be one too many. But this is a repeating pattern with this speaker where repeated cover-ups have occurred. If you look back, as I did, to the quotes that were issued during the Michael Boxley situation, they're almost identical to what was said a week ago. So I think that this has got to come to an end, and it's time for the people of New York, it's time for this governor, it's time for our Democratic colleagues to stand up and demand that the speaker step down. This cannot stand. And if we're talking about protecting women, which we're all concerned about, how can you turn a blind eye to this type of abuse that's gone on repeatedly here? And it really is enough type of thing. So you have an opportunity here, our Democratic colleagues do, to hold a vote of no confidence. And I hope that they do that. And also, I just want to reiterate something that Assemblyman Lawler said. I think that there is a very real possibility, or at least it should be investigated. Was that check mailed out of the state? Was it mailed within the state? There's a real possibility that it was, in fact, mailed. And if that check was gotten through conspiracy to commit fraud, if you will, if he lied about what the use of that money was for, then there's a very real possibility here that something criminal took place. And I think at the very least we need to take a look at that. So that's what we're calling on the Attorney General, the District Attorney here in Albany, and if need be a U.S. Attorney to get involved and investigate so that we can fully and finally get to the bottom of what went on. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bill Noje. I represent the 133rd Assembly District. Last week, I sat down and carefully read through again the full 70-page report prepared by J-Cope that recalled a timeline of what happened and who was involved. I also read the Staten Island District Attorney Dan Donovan's report and took note of a couple things. Number one, and I believe this has been said before, but it bears repeating, Mr. Donovan's report was limited in scope to activities in Brooklyn. That is stated not once, not twice, but 3 times in the 7-page report. I don't speak for Mr. Donovan. I have not spoken with Mr. Donovan. I believe his report stands on its own. But when you say something 3 times in a 7-page report, it becomes very clear to any reader that he was trying to send a message. His scope was limited by the terms of his engagement with, under the existing, the standing Brooklyn District Attorney, 2 events that occurred in Brooklyn and which could be prosecuted in Brooklyn. That leaves open the gaping question of, well, what happened in Albany or other places outside of Brooklyn that other people should be investigating? The Albany County District Attorney, Mr. Soares, was quoted in newspaper articles as saying the phone never rang. Well, Mr. Soares, the phone is ringing today. We call upon you to take a look at whether there is probable cause based upon the information in the JCOPE report and other information that is available to your office. And if there is probable cause, this matter should be prosecuted. The worst thing that can happen is that a little over 5 months from now, after Election Day, that someone like Vito Lopez would be elected to New York City Council, that all the staff involved with the cover-up are still holding their jobs, that Mr. Silver is still the Speaker, and at the end of the day, there have been no serious repercussions for anybody involved with the original scandal or the cover-up of that scandal using over $100,000 of taxpayer money. It's time for Mr. Soares to do his duty under his oath to the Constitution and the laws of the state of New York and look at whether there is probable cause that crimes were committed in Albany County. If Mr. Soares will not do his duty, then we should call upon Governor Cuomo to appoint a special prosecutor with multi-county jurisdiction. And we would also ask the U.S. Attorney from the Northern District of New York, as Mr. McLaughlin just mentioned, to inquire whether there were instruments of interstate commerce employed, the U.S. Postal Service or other instruments that would trigger federal jurisdiction into either the original crime or the cover-up of that crime by members of the staff and others here in Albany who did use over $103,000 of taxpayer money as what cannot be described as anything other than a cover-up of the original crime by Mr. Lopez. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Mr. Butler?
Yeah, we often hear the phrase that government ought to run more like business. Well, I will stand here today and tell many of us have experience in the private sector, and I will tell you if these kind of circumstances had occurred in a business or an industry, I will tell you that the top management people in that company or that business would now be feeding pigeons in the park rather than sitting in the chair of the highest executive of that organization. I think we ought to hold our public service people as accountable as we do our private industry people as well. So I would say there is certainly a precedent. We need to look at what happened here and address it. A private business would, an industry would. Why don't we here in government? Why do we just continue along the same path we've been traveling for many years now? Thanks.
Like the use of $103,000 of taxpayer money to settle a situation like this is wrong. And I would simply say that if the shoe were on the other foot and this were happening to a Republican speaker, we know very well how loud the cries would be from the other side of the aisle to get to the bottom of it. As Mr. Noje explained, there are some very interesting details that can be and should be explored here, and the silence from the other side, of course, is deafening.
two quick things before we go to questions. Number one, every Democrat in a competitive race back in November 2012 was asked, "Oh, you're going to vote for Speaker Silver? Or what do you think of this allegation of suborning sexual harassment in the Assembly?" And almost everyone gave the exact same packaged answer. Well, the report is going to come out and let the process play out, and we'll see what happens then. Well, the report is out, and it's actually uglier than most of us thought last summer. So I hope the members of the press corps will go and ask these members who said, "Get back to me when the report is over," and ask them, where do you stand now on Speaker Silver? Should he stay? And if the answer is yes, why should he stay? And then I'll say something else before questions. There are good people on the other side of the aisle. I've worked with them. I know there are many, many good Democrat members of the Assembly. One of the iconic Democrats was John F. Kennedy. He wrote a book called Profiles in Courage, and it was a book dedicated to leaders who went against their party, went against their base to do the right thing. That was the definition in the eyes of John F. Kennedy of a profile in courage. So I'm asking my Assembly members, in addition to Michael Kearns, to come out and be a profile in courage, stand up for nice workplaces where there is not a hostile atmosphere, stand up for women in the workplace, stand up for what is right. Any questions?
Please give us a little more detail on possible mail fraud. What would that involve, and what kind of indications we have that might have even taken place?
Well, if the payment was labeled as what it was not. In other words, if they made a payment that was said to be legal attorney fees, that's not what it was. So that's fraud there. Once you put fraud into the stream of the U.S. Postal Service, you have the potential for mail fraud. Same thing if the money was wired. We don't know all the answers. We are not district attorneys. We're just saying this bears, this warrants and has the gravity that the people who are charged with investigating such things should look into it.
And that went to the controller, in other words, to sign off on mislabeled potentially?
It went, and then it went to the attorney for the women, and then to the women.
But I think the point is that if you read the J. Cope report, it's clear that the state controller himself did not sign off on anything. And in fact, members of his staff did not sign off on the settlement agreement or any particular terms. Neither did the Attorney General's office. In fact, they had made clear to the Assembly that they did not favor any agreement with a confidentiality provision. And as you read the J. Cope report, it's clear that staff in the Attorney General's office saw that there was something labeled confidentiality, and they didn't even finish reading the agreement. So this has the responsibility of just one party, and that is the Speaker of the Assembly. No one else was involved. Nobody else signed off on it. Then the question becomes, how was the request for the $103,000 expressed to the Comptroller's office when the request for the check came through? The answer is, in the J. Cope report, that it was a member of the Assembly staff working for Mr. Silver that characterized the payment as legal fees, or fees for legal services. That is clearly not what those funds were for. A small portion of it might have been for legal fees, but the bulk of the payment was a payoff for a settlement for the charges of sexual harassment. That's fraud. If that occurred in a private business setting, the person who did that would be fired, and if there was culpability, if there was intention to defraud, then there would be criminal charges at least looked at. That's the basis upon which we believe there is probable cause for the district attorney to at least look at the chain of events. In the J. Cope report, the only thing you see listed is the account of the individual involved. Well, that's not usually how criminal investigations work. Usually you look at all the facts and circumstances, and if there is reason for doubt about the culpability of the individual, you present it to a grand jury or to others in the criminal justice process. That has not happened here. I mean, it was especially interesting to me to read all the news reports after Mr. Donovan's report came out, where people were saying, oh, you see, they concluded there's no criminal conduct. They concluded there was no criminal conduct in New York City, in that one borough. They did not conclude that there was no criminal conduct any place attributable to Mr. Lopez. And that's what we're asking, that is what we're asking for the Albany District Attorney to look into.
And if I could follow up real quickly on that, I mean, were you disappointed at the scope of that investigation? Do you feel in hindsight it should have been more open-ended and less limited?
I'm not going to second-guess the process. I wasn't involved. None of us were directly involved in the process. I do think it's interesting that the process did narrow the scope so much to just one borough of Manhattan, knowing full well, when you read the Jacob report, that all of the potentially criminal activity occurred someplace else. So it's like the magician saying, look over here when there's something going on under there. And, whether that was an accident, whether that was planned, or whether it just happened that way, I'll leave to your own conclusions.
Assemblyman, what do you think of now that the Assembly is going to no longer have confidential settlements? There's some who say, well, maybe the accuser will want some level of confidentiality if there's an agreement, and they don't want their name out in the public. How do you balance the rights of somebody who might file a harassment complaint with the public's right to know?
Yeah, I think there's competing interests, and the problem is the rules have been set up in the past, and then they've been broken, and then there have been promises to we'll follow the rules this time, and then they've been broken again. So I think right now, because of all that's gone on, you really need to make sure there is an open and transparent process. It's unfortunate in these sensitive matters that it has to be that way, but what's gone on here for years, more than a decade, maybe longer, is why we are brought to this point where you can have transparency. In fact, future victims are going to be a victim of what's happened in the past in addition to their present victimhood, because we cannot have these confidential agreements because we know that they're abused.
So you feel like it all should be public?
I do right now, yes, especially under the current leadership. I mean, we know from what's happened. We know from the 70-page Jacob report, we cannot trust them with confidentiality because they will abuse it to cover up the harassment of women and who knows what else.
Can I just follow on to that? I want to make it clear for the record, though, that if you read the Jacob report, the plaintiff's attorneys did not request a confidentiality agreement. That was a request from the Assembly. In fact, the attorneys for the plaintiffs objected to some of the terms of a confidentiality agreement. I mean, this is in the Jacob report. The idea of covering this up was not something that came out of the women who were abused. It's something that came out of the people who are trying to cover up the abuse.
And in fact, the penalty, if one of the victims broke confidentiality, was $10,000. So they were actually held to confidentiality themselves under penalty of having to pay $10,000.
You said a couple times that the wording for that check was attorney's fees or something like that.
I'll give
legal services.
No, it's I have it written down right here. Just a second. It was legal-attorney.
Actually, the actual heading that we got from the Comptroller's Office is legal services. I just want to make sure that
there was sort of a category, and then they brought it down to a subcategory of legal-attorney.
So your concern is there, no matter what of those descriptions,
That's not what it was. Why couldn't they have written a sentence that said settlement for Vito Lopez's or Assemblyman number one's harassment?
The other thing,
That would have been transparency.
Right.
That would have been good government.
the Brooklyn DA was obligated to, if he saw any criminality or evidence of criminality, to report that to other DAs, like the Albany County DA. Did anyone talk to them, or do you think that it was limited so much that he didn't even have the opportunity to see any kind of criminality elsewhere?
I'm not sure, but if the scope was too narrow, then what we're saying today is let's open it up a little bit. We're giving an invitation to law enforcement to look into these matters. You have 8 or 9 members of the Assembly calling for it, so that's a very, very big invitation to look into it. If it was too narrow in scope, then we can correct that by expanding it right now.
Yeah, and you guys must talk to your colleagues, right? The Democrats. I mean, what are they telling you? Is it done for them?
I'm not sure. I don't know if they're going to confide in us how they're really feeling. There's been published reports that said the unified face of the Democrat Party is just that, a face, a facade, and that there's a lot of dissension. But we're not in the room. I don't know if anybody else can address that.
Have Democrats given you any indication that you've still got traction on this at this point?
I believe we have a tremendous amount of traction just talking to people, just talking to staffers in this building. They're cheerleading for this press conference today for somebody to make sure that we pursue this fully.
But you need the Democrats to vote.
Yeah, well, that's what we're doing. We're asking them. We're
But
asking
you
them.
don't have any indication that there's a division in there, or that there's a movement among the Democrats?
I mean, other than the published reports that say that's happening, which I have reason to believe are accurate, and there is one member.
Forgive me if this has been, this was.
But they haven't been asked. The folks who sit in your chairs have not asked them, at least in the case of a lot of the Democrats that are said, let the process play out and then get back to me. They haven't gotten that follow-up question. We're asking them right now, but we're also asking you to do is ask the individual members, why do you continue to stand by Silver? you know.
Forgive me if this was asked before I got here, but
Yep.
don't you think this is something that your conference's leader needs to take more of a leadership role in? If this is as important as you say, he's the leader of your conference. Would you say that he has been the loyal opposition in this regard on this issue?
Well, I wish there was 152 members in here right now. I wish the entire Republican conference was in here right now. But there are different schedules. There are different perspectives on this. But I think everybody should be here. It's good policy. It's the right thing to do to stand up for these women. So I wish everybody was here.
You're not blaming Leader Kolb's absence from this press conference on his schedule, are you? Because he has really been very quiet on the
Right.
speaker's remaining in leadership kind of throughout this whole
Yeah,
episode.
I wish everyone, including the leader, would call on the speaker to step down. The New York Times has done it. The Daily News has done it. Those are not conservative papers. I wish the governor would do the same thing. Right.
Why do you think that is, Assemblyman? I mean, here you have 43 members. You have half dozen or so here now. Assembly Democrats, as you said, only one is called for Silver's ouster. I mean, why is it so quiet among members generally?
Because of the very reason we're here. Speaker Silver is a bully. He has bullied down opposition to the point where there is very little opposition. And some of his tactics have been come right up to the line of what's ethical and what's not. Moving offices around, taking away salaries. He intimidates. He uses taxpayer money and campaign money to intimidate his own conference and the other conference. But I'm not intimidated. The other people in this room aren't intimidated.
So you think the intimidation is both for Democrats and some Republicans as well?
Absolutely. For Democrats, it's the internal assembly working, stipends, leadership posts, all that, and campaign cash to their campaigns. And for Republicans, sure. Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to get reelected to come back up here and represent their people, sure. But I think it's like football. If you play football to not get hurt, your chances of getting hurt are greater. If you play football aggressively, the way football is meant to be played, you're less likely to get hurt. So I play politics aggressively.
I'm sorry, so you do have just 7 people.
We do have a session, too, coming up.
Right.
Right now.
Yeah.
Is there anything more important for the Republican conference than trying to get Shelley Silver out? And
Well, we have great policy, and Sheldon Silver stands in the way of great policy. So our great policy is at the top of the list, and a necessary corollary to that, I would say, is
No, I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying
yeah,
you have
good.
just 7 people. You have just 7 people here.
Yeah.
I mean, what would the reason be for that?
well, the things we just discussed. There's scheduling. There's some that are not ready to call for Silver to step down. You have to ask the individuals. We're the ones here.
So even most of your conference isn't behind this?
No, I wouldn't say that. There are members of our conference who are not here right now who wrote op-eds in their local paper, who have quotes in major newspapers saying Silver should step down. So just because they're not standing here today doesn't mean that they're not.
And does Leader Kolb, do you have a concern?
You should ask Leader Cole.
Do you have a concern with Leader Kolb that he's not here on this major
No,
issue? For
no
you?
more than I do with everyone else.
You don't think he should be in leadership?
Every member of the Assembly represents about 130,000 people. We're all, by definition, leaders. So I don't think we need somebody at the top. That's one difference between our conference and the Democrat conference. They don't make a move without their boss. I think it's to Leader Kolb's credit that we can be independent actors and do what we think is right, without having to have the boss sign off on it, so to speak.
You've made a study of the Senate Democratic Conference over the course of the last couple of years.
What do you mean?
They're famous for making moves without their leaders. Who's the leader?
Sure. A lot of those leaders are
The
in some
Senate
trouble, too.
conference, you say, Casey?
Anyone else?
Senate, you said? Yeah.
Senate,
Yeah. Not so much in the Assembly.
Anyone else have anything to say or any more questions?
No, one thing I want to add, just you were talking about some of the members. The one thing that was interesting to me, it talked about intimidation and some of the pressure that can be brought to bear. I'm not sure which member said it. I read it over the weekend, but it wasn't attributed to a specific Democrat member. But it was one of the female members, and she said that I still want to get things done. And that was her reason for not saying anything. And I just think that was a very telling quote as to why a lot of people choose not to stand up and push back. I think that if you're doing the right thing, Shelley Silver's not irreplaceable. Someday he's going to move off the scene, off the stage, one way or another, and somebody else will take the leadership position. If you're up here doing the right thing, you should be able to get your stuff done no matter who that leader is. So I just found that to be an interesting insight into why some people choose not to stand up.
Well, and leaders of women's groups, when they're asked that question, the question of kind of Silver remaining, what they say is that the one thing that shouldn't happen is that a leadership fight should not result in harm being made their agenda items such as the women's equality agenda. Do you think that's hypocritical?
I think it's very hypocritical of many of those groups that aren't standing up right now. I mean, to talk about the war on women as they continually talk about, and then given it right in front of them, and to not stand up and say he's got to go, I think is the height of hypocrisy, in my opinion. They would obviously disagree, but I think what the message is sent there, Casey, is that as long as our progressive agenda continues, then if other people get thrown under the bus along the way, oh well. That seems to be the message that they're sending.
Real quick, Bill Nojay, and then we all have to get to session.
No, I just want to make a two-word answer to the questions about why isn't there more support for doing these things within the Democratic Conference. I'm not going to speak for them, but I'll speculate, and those two words are Michael Bragman. Anybody who was around at that time knows what happened. They know the consequences, and I suspect you have heard Michael Bragman's name more in the last couple of weeks than you have in the last couple of years in these chambers.
Overcome the intimidation of what happens to someone who starts a coup? I mean, is there?
Well, nobody's suggesting a coup here. I mean, that word is not in the lexicon. We're asking them. Well, Michael Bragman wanted a change of leadership, okay, and what we're suggesting is it's time for our Democratic colleagues to take a look at who their leader is, who is representing them in the eyes of the public, and if 5 months from now we're going to go back to business as usual in Albany, which is the current course that we're on. In fact, the New York Daily News had an article this morning about how Governor Cuomo is urging Sheldon Silver. Let's just forget about all that Vito Lopez stuff and let's move on. That is the absolute worst thing you can tell people if you are really trying to stamp out a culture of either corruption or abuse.
And how much does the governor bear responsibility for this, since he's head of the party?
I'm not going to. He is the head of the party, and we have called upon the governor to be more forceful in this regard. We wish that he would be more forceful in this regard. And as I mentioned earlier, you said how many Democrats are going to come along. It's not just the Democrat members of the Assembly. We're also calling for the Albany County District Attorney to investigate whether there is probable cause based upon the JCOPE report to take action. So, and if the Albany County DA doesn't, that does fall then within the governor's purview to appoint a special prosecutor.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.